You are now listening to the Hot Take Podcast, brought to you by Full Time Fantasy. Here are your hosts, Toroni and Josh Dalley. Time to make it hot.
Welcome in. This is the Hot Take Podcast, and we are back. It is exciting times, guys. We are back with a brand new episode of the Hot Take. It's been a little while, but, some things have changed. It's going to be a new season here, and now we're back to talk some football on a weekly basis. I'm excited to introduce to you my new co-host, Josh Dalley. What is going on, buddy?
Living the dream, brother. Glad to be a part of the Hot Take here and excited to be recording the first episode here for the new season.
Yeah, man. So I guess we met because I was writing for Fantrax, and the next fan up, you welcomed me on, and we had a great time.
Yeah, absolutely. Had a couple seasons there at Next Fan Up. Kind of not really sure what's going on there with Next Fan Up right now if we're going to be moving forward with the season. We just punched out a CBA episode, so it's a very fan-centric episode with me and the other team's super fans. But, I don't know if we're going to have the fantasy show going. There's kind of a lot going on right now with some uncertainty, but hopefully we have another season of that coming up. But hey, we're all about the hot take right here, so I'm ready to go.
Yeah, for sure. The Hot Take has had a little bit of history now. Of course, shout out to my former co-host Blake Sullivan. Of course, we're going to have him on at some point here, probably pretty frequently because obviously this show would not have been a thing without Blake. So I just want to shout out Blake. Best of luck with everything with him. And, of course, he's got, the Fantasy Gaming Network that he does over there. And that occupies a lot of his time anyway. So I feel as if, it's best to keep it going here. And I'm excited to talk about 2020 Dynasty for one thing. And, Josh, a lot of the time we've talked fantasy is for DFS, right? But right now we're going complete opposite. We're going long-term. And a lot of Dynasty startups are going on right now. So I just want to get right into it. I want to talk about who are you targeting in a Dynasty startup right now? And this could be at any point in the draft. Your obvious names are going to be up there, like Nick Chubb, people like that you want in the first round. But who are you looking at that you think you can get maybe at a discount?
I don't know if it's going to be at a discount, but I definitely love David Montgomery. There is some negative kind of blowback here on Montgomery. But, I just feel like the situation is it's very strong. It's not like the situation where you saw Jameis Winston having a lack of a running game like in Tampa, for example. And sometimes that can help because that the quarterback's going to be throwing a lot. And I think this is kind of the inverse. We've seen these Bears games where David Montgomery is out there and he looks great. And it would just be nice to, we did see it at the end of the season. He did get a little more run. But how many times did we see Nagy on the sidelines just so frustrated with the offense and its inability to execute? And I feel like with Montgomery out there, we did see him start to really pick up the carries in that, like I mentioned, in the second half of the season. But it just seemed like the offense flowed a little bit better. And if you're trying to hide a quarterback like Mitch Trubisky, I feel like getting Montgomery the ball is the way to do that. And right now in Dynasty leagues, if I'm doing a startup, I'm finding that I do have him just a little bit higher than your average Dynasty rankings right now. Of course, I do a little bit of work over at Fantasy Pros. A quick glance at some of the running back rankings, that we have for Dynasty over there. Montgomery's, popped in right now at the number 18. And, me personally, I have him in that 13 and 14 range ahead of guys like Todd Gurley and Melvin Gordon, who I just think are in that wave of running backs that, everyone's saying, oh, you shouldn't have paid these guys. And then now look what's happening. So from a Dynasty standpoint, I definitely have Montgomery above those guys. And he's who I'm targeting personally.
Yeah, I think the way we kind of started this was, saying the word a discount, right? And you said, I'm not sure if that's going to be, viable at this point. But I really do think it is. And just because, kind of like you mentioned, there's not a lot of positivity going on with David Montgomery right now, especially with that Bears offense. What's going on with Mitch Trubisky? I mean, this is his last shot. And it's early on in his career, and it's unfortunate. But, if he plays, let's say, as he did last year, let's say he just stays stagnant. I don't know if that's going to happen, but I believe that would be his last chance. You're right. They need to lean on David Montgomery. It would be a lot more clear without Tariq Cohen there for a lot of people. But I do really believe that the Bears would be doing themselves a disservice if they got rid of Cohen at this point. They need to find a way to get him involved in the passing game to help Trubisky even more underneath. They really did a bad job of that last year. And again, they really didn't do a good job of getting David Montgomery involved. But I will say there were times last year where Montgomery didn't look great. Would you agree with that, Josh? Would you say that, for me, when I was watching him, a lot of times he hesitated and didn't make decisive cuts. And when he did that, he was a lot better.
Yeah, I think one game in particular that sticks out in my memory is that game that they really struggled to win against Giants back in the middle of the year. I mean, he just couldn't get anything going on the ground, but, he had a couple of performances like that against the Rams, I believe, as well. And now that I'm looking here, those were back-to-back weeks. And that was that's a point last year when coming off those two subpar performances where, people were just trashing him. I mean, that's pretty much all you saw if you were looking up David Montgomery stuff on Twitter. And that's the point where, I was targeting him in my current Dynasty leagues. But, since we're talking about startup, I mean, hey, this is why I love doing startups at this time of the year, because this is when I want to be able to get David Montgomery, who's ranked, as the 18th running back, which I think is fair in Dynasty. I mean, he did finish as the RB20 last year. So to have him higher up in my rankings, this is a time of year where I can capitalize on that, because I do feel like, Melvin Gordon might be a free agent out for a while, and maybe his value takes a hit. So I think the ability for Montgomery to leapfrog the guys like I mentioned, like Gurley and Melvin Gordon. Not that I hate those guys. It's just I feel like eventually he's going to kind of come back. But to answer your question, yeah, I mean there was definitely a couple games where he sucked, and I mean that's because I think the Bears offense as a whole really couldn't get anything going, and so I feel bad for Allen Robinson as well.
I'm retired police officer Bill McReynolds, the host of the Boys in Blue podcast, a podcast that's all about cops. The Boys in Blue podcast is undoubtedly the most informative law enforcement podcast out there today, because we'll talk to real cops, some active, some retired, and we'll get the inside story on law enforcement. And through our conversations with these real cops, we'll get into their personal experiences and get answers to questions like, what does it take to emotionally survive an occupation with so much danger and stress? And also the very question that sparked the creation of this podcast. After 20, 30 years of being on the front lines and fighting crime, as you approach the end of a fascinating career, how do you successfully make that lifestyle transition into civilian mode? You can look forward to some powerful insights from street-savvy cops who've been there and done that. So buckle up, rock and load, and get ready for some candid conversations with some real cops, our real heroes. Boys in Blue comes out every other week. Subscribe to Boys in Blue podcast wherever you get your podcasts.
Allen Robinson is at least in a good situation just because he's hyper targeted at times, as he should be, and I think that Mitch Trubisky is just at a point in his career right now where he needs to hyper target. We see a lot of backup quarterbacks come in the past with DeAndre Hopkins. We weren't that upset when, someone would come in, just give DeAndre Hopkins 19 targets. So, Allen Robinson is definitely in a good position. I would argue right now better than Montgomery, but Josh, you're completely right. It's clear that Montgomery's in a good situation where he is the number one back that's going to get the bulk of the carries. And you could argue your Detroit Lions, looking at Kerryon Johnson, similar situation, but I would say he's even safer than Johnson as far as the ability to give him the ball without, doing this whole committee approach that the Lions, have done in the past.
Yeah, and I mean, that's one of the appeals for me with Montgomery is, we know he's going to be the guy. And, it's like you said with Cohen, they definitely, I thought, for all the praise that, Matt Nagy had received recently, I thought that he did do a bad job getting not only Montgomery the ball, but Cohen as well. And I mean, it just seemed like too many times. Of course, I got to see them play the entire game against, the Lions both times I watched that go down when the Lions were in full tank mode. But it's, it was weird because the way that they were being utilized was, it was almost opposite. Like there was a lot of short yardage situations where you'd see Tariq Cohen in there. And it's like, man, you would at least think, Mike Davis or Montgomery would be in there if that's how they wanted to play it. And it was really strange, the running back usage. And, we know that throwing the ball to the running backs is probably the most efficient thing you can do. I mean, even Montgomery, catching, 71% of his passes or targets, I should say, a little over 5 yards a target. But I mean, hey, if you're doing that twice in a series, I mean, you're gonna move the chains at least once. So it's one of those things where the effectiveness as being that featured number one guy could be better. It just we want to see him get that same workload, with touches, including the receiving. So, let's get 250 carries, but, it'd be nice to also see him maybe take, a step up into maybe like the 45 reception range.
You know whose ceiling I think is higher in 2020 than David Montgomery?
Lay it on me.
It's Devin Singletary.
Oh, yeah.
And, I would not have ever said that going into last season. I was big on David Montgomery. They traded up, the Bears traded up to get him, and it just looked beautiful. You had the naysayers praising Mike Davis like he was going to give threats to David Montgomery. No. But, man, Devin Singletary, the last few weeks of the season, I mean, he had 96% of the snaps in week 16. So after Frank Gore, he kind of went away. At the beginning of the season, he was pretty annoying for Devin Singletary owners, and I think that was to be expected. But if you were a Singletary owner and you held on, you really got rewarded. And, he averaged 5.1 yards per carry, which, look, I mean, that's what you want in your running back. I mean, rookie season, he got targeted 41 times. So in some games, there was 1, 2, 3, 4 games where he was targeted at least 6 times. So you like to see that. And look, what's going on? Frank Gore is gone. Unless they bring anyone else in, it's Devin Singletary's show for a team that runs the ball 45%. And we're talking about Josh Allen as well here, which that's all great for Devin Singletary. The more Josh Allen runs and can pick up yards, the better Devin Singletary will produce. That's going to go hand in hand. Just like you've probably seen it, Josh, with, let's say Deshaun Watson, right? Lamar Miller, who's seen his better days, at least was productive with Deshaun Watson, with the running quarterback. I mean, what we saw this year with Lamar Jackson.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, you've seen that all the way since like the days of Donovan McNabb, in the Eagles days. Like those, anytime, that there was a productive running quarterback, the running back numbers would uptick. And I think that's very characteristic here. And another reason I also like Singletary.
So Singletary, according to Fantasy Football Calculator, and, I think around this time of year, things get a little wonky over there. But Devin Singletary, according to this, is going at the 4.11 in Dynasty startups. What a steal. In my opinion, really, what a steal. He's not even 23 yet. So, when you factor that in, that was his rookie season, and now that he's going to be the guy. Now, of course, this offseason could change things. They could bring in somebody. I don't know if they will. I don't think they will, but they certainly could. I mean, they got, Yeldon there still, so they could maybe run him a little bit more next year. So that'll be interesting to see. But right now, Devin Singletary is in a great situation.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I take a look here at the Dynasty rankings for Fantasy Pros. Singletary also, I feel like, being disrespected. He's currently in at 22nd. And, I mean, it's just behind guys like Le'Veon Bell, major uncertainty there. Chris Carson, the injury, we're not going to know until he's coming out of the later stages of rehab, how ready he's going to be come training camp. And, Kenyon Drake, I mean, that's, and those are the three running backs between Montgomery and Singletary. And then otherwise, I mean, based on how you might have these guys valued, these guys are in the same territory. So it's definitely a situation that I love for Singletary with, like you said, Frank Gore being so annoying. I mean, he's annoyed us for years though. So it's like, we can't hate on Frank Gore,
love Frank Gore.
Yeah, he's just doing his thing, man. But,
they're talking about him going back to Miami next year.
Oh yeah, I mean, well, hopefully we don't see that, because I know there's a guy that you like there. But but you mentioned the receptions, and he had a game against Baltimore where he caught 8 balls. But you said four games where he's getting half a dozen targets. You love to see that, but it's weird that in some of those games early in the year where he wasn't getting a lot of run, with the carries, that I thought that's how they would probably use him, especially after week 1, and then came out and then it kind of went back to that. So. But it is nice to see that kind of development, with these guys, these younger quarterbacks. We do want to see these guys get more touches and kind of not necessarily take the burden off these younger quarterbacks, but I feel like the Bills' offense has been trending in the right direction. And I like that offense as a whole a little bit more better than the Bears. But yeah, both of these guys just neck and neck for me right now.
Yeah, you're going to get Bills players at discounts again next year. And we've already seen it. We've had a whole year of decent production from John Brown, Josh Allen, and Devin Singletary. Singletary along with the targets, at least three games with 20 carries. There's a high ceiling there for Singletary, especially, look, if he's just the guy, they don't bring in anyone else. It's just him and Yeldon. It's guns a-blazing for Singletary, and you're not going to have to pay up for him in redraft at all. And then Dynasty startup, you're still getting a value. So, yeah, I love it all the way around for Singletary. So let's move on to the opposite end of the age spectrum here, and going from Singletary to Mr. David Johnson. It was a horrendous bust of a season for 2019 David Johnson owners. I thought he was worthy of that first-round pick too. I probably would have taken him, if the circumstances were there. You're at that 6-7 spot. David Johnson's good value, but he started off hot. I shouldn't say too hot, but the targets that he was getting and the way he was used in the passing game at the beginning of the season really was inspiring for David Johnson owners. And I think we saw it, with that Kyler Murray-led offense, that he could just be used as that passing back, because that's what David Johnson can do. He's had an 80 reception season in his career. Josh, what are your thoughts on David Johnson? I mean, you're getting him at a crazy value right now. His value has certainly dipped. No one wants to take a shot of him. He's just sitting there. Do you take a shot?
I mean, I feel like some of this is going to be, landing spot dependent the later we get here in the year. But, as of right now,
as a free agent.
Absolutely. And I mean, that's because I feels like that's the way that this is. And I know Steve Kimes kind of came out and said that, cutting him is not an option. People say these things. I mean, I don't trust Steve Kimes as far as I can side eye the guy. So it's, it is just, let me be the first to say though, that I was definitely wrong. I had him as, the 5th overall pick all last year, and he did not budge. I was very excited about the prospects of this Arizona offense. And don't get me wrong. I mean, dude, if he stays there, I still think he can be effective, but I mean, Kenyon Drake just looked amazing. He was like 2 or 3 days after they had traded him. I mean, he just went out and had a massive game for fantasy owners.
Yeah, don't do that to me, Josh. I'm done with David Johnson in Arizona because of Kenyon Drake. let's get David Johnson in another spot because Drake is in a beautiful position and his skill set is built for that team.
Yeah, one kind of ideal trade scenario that I have floating around in my head is I don't think Bruce Arians is very high on O.J. Howard at all. And I think that the Cardinals really – I mean, that's one weapon that I feel like they've never had is like a great tight end. And, could you think of O.J. Howard and Kyler Murray playing together? I mean, that would be awesome. And sending back, David Johnson and, whatever else the other way. I mean, it feels like a great trade scenario.
I'm all for it. I'm all for it.
I just feel like a change of scenery is probably necessary because you look at Johnson after, a lost season of coming off of 2017 where, I mean, the dude played the one game and, then to come out and have the season like he did in 2018, not really what a lot of people expected there. I mean, you thought coming off of an 80 catch season in 2016 that he was going to be able to maybe get you, at least 60 catches. And, it was definitely a disappointing season as far as, the reception totals. Of course, he didn't even crack 1,000 yards. But, to see what we saw in 2019, which is just kind of, I mean, I'm chalking most of this up to, a lot of the injuries, but he never looked right. And a lot of people are probably going to go back and maybe watch some of these Cardinals games and just, he looks dusted. And, but I think a ton of that is due to injury. So yeah, man, let's get him in Tampa, which seems to by far be the most popular,
Definitely. I mean, look, it's the same as last year. Everyone wanted, the more high-profile free agent running backs to go to Tampa. It didn't happen. And, it's Ronald Jones and Peyton Barber. Terrible, terrible situation for fantasy. And, now you have Bruce Arians talking about Ronald Jones in positive light. So we'll see what happens with David Johnson. I think that at this point, he's going to be 29. You're going to get him at value. So, depending on who's there, depending on, you might get him in the, in a dynasty startup, he dropped. I think the one I participated in recently, I think he went in the 6th round, 7th round, something like that, where you're not really losing out. I mean, it's worth the shot. In redraft, it'll be interesting to see where he lands. He's probably going to be in a position where he's starting. He'll probably be a 4th or 5th round pick. I mean, what would you say? Like, let's say if he's on the Buccaneers and he's going in being the starter, would he be a 4th round pick, do you think?
Oh, I definitely think he could be because there's massive upside there, man. I mean, it's just the one thing you look at, and I haven't seen a lot of the Cardinals tape yet from last year, but being that I own Jameis Winston pretty much everywhere in all my dynasty leagues, I have went back and looked at a lot of Buccaneers stuff. And there's just no consistency with pass catching out of the backfield. And that's something that David Johnson can definitely do. And this is, somebody that he's familiar with in Arians. So it's like, it's just a match made in heaven, man. So if he did land in Tampa, I mean, I think that's why it is the most popular speculative landing spot because that's what we all want to see, man. I mean, I think that's the best thing for David Johnson's value. I think that's the best thing for David Johnson's real-life NFL career. And I personally would love to see it. So let's get him out there. And, for me being a Jameis Winston owner in Dynasty, I feel like that would be awesome to have. We obviously can't rely on O.J. Howard in Tampa. So let's get somebody that he can throw the ball to underneath and bail him out so he doesn't make so many of these boneheaded decisions, man. I mean, how tired are we seeing him just kind of chuck it? And it's like, hey, having David Johnson there would definitely help that problem. And I think you could probably agree with me. That is his main, that's his main con is he's too turnover prone.
Exactly. But, with Jameis, those turnovers are going to turn into him just having to pass the ball more. So it always, this past season, definitely frustrating, but he came through with fantasy points. I mean, very rarely was he going under 300 passing yards and multiple touchdowns along with those multiple interceptions. So, yeah, it's the good and the bad with Jameis Winston. You just hope that Bruce Arians can level him out at some point here. I was hoping that could happen a little bit quicker, but at least we did see, a pretty massive fantasy season from Winston. You would have to think that his floor, it would be just a lot safer with David Johnson there catching some balls out of the backfield. And I think that's probably the best role that David Johnson could be in is, giving him maybe something like 14 carries a game, but feeding him with, 5 or 6 targets in the game. That's what David Johnson should do right now in his career. Let's talk about wide receivers right now. And these are guys that we saw the breakout last year, as far as I'm concerned, with both of these guys. And we're going to talk about Kenny Golladay, your boy from Detroit Lions, and Cortland Sutton of the Denver Broncos. So Kenny Golladay in a weird season where, the Lions won 3 games. Matthew Stafford was done. How many games did Stafford play? Something like 7 games?
I think he played 7 or 8, yeah.
Something like that. Okay. And, Golladay, kind of like what we were talking about earlier, with backup quarterback situation for Detroit, Golladay still got his. He was peppered with targets and he caught a lot of touchdowns. So it really wasn't that much of a negative thing for Golladay. But let's not overthink this, folks. A full season of Matthew Stafford is what we want for Kenny Golladay, and that's what we're projecting for next season. So how are you viewing Golladay right now, Josh? And I know that you have to take away some of that bias there from being a Lions fan.
You're definitely tugging at my fandom strings here, but it's this, you said it. This is my dude. You're talking about Babytron. I remember Derek. We had Derek Brown on Next Fan Up. Derek came on with a Babytron T-shirt on when we were doing the pre-show video.
Oh man,
and it's just there. Oh, it's just like best friends. So it's but no, to be honest with you, last year this time going into it, the dude was targeted, and same thing last year. It wasn't, it was 119 targets, and just didn't realize that. As someone that watched all the games on a week-by-week basis, I never sat down in one period and watched like all the games in succession like I would, for example, like I just mentioned with the Buccaneers film. So, seeing those games spread out, you didn't realize that he was targeted so much. And then last year it's the same thing, but 116 targets, those were a little different because, like you mentioned, only half of those were coming from Matty Stafford. But you just wanted to see the same volume going in, but the only thing that you could really ask for was, a little more efficiency, and he gave that to you. He went from 71% to basically 74.5% last year, and you wanted to see him get in the box a few more times. Now, keep in mind, 2018, he did have quite a few touchdowns called back or get overturned. Last year, he even had a few as well. So and that's the thing too here is if 1 or 2 of those count, you're talking about a dude having 13 touchdowns instead of 11, which is still great considering it was David Blau season here in Detroit. Yeah, so it's you never really like to see the quote unquote camp arm eventually starting games, but that's how the tank engine runs smoothly at the end of the season. So
David Blau was probably a funny name to be said, for a drunk Lions fan after a touchdown. That's not David Blau. All right.
Yeah.
Just getting revved up for some David Blau only to be, of course, let down. He's not going to win the game for you there, unfortunately.
Let's not make any mistakes, but
look at, no disrespect to Mr. David Blau. Sorry if you're listening, bud. Look, I'm looking at the target numbers here. The first 5 games of the season with Stafford for Golladay, 9, 10, 8, 9, 9. So, Stafford was peppering this man with targets. We did have a 12-target game. I believe that was Blau in week 15. I'm not exactly sure if that was him playing that game. I think that he was. But it was a little bit more inconsistent than with Stafford, who really was peppering him, even with Marvin Jones out there, which, you love to see. You love to see that Golladay can still get a high volume, even if Marvin Jones is out there. Do we know Marvin Jones' situation for next year at this point?
Yeah, he's still under contract. Unfortunately, he's one of those guys that we signed him I mean, it feels like forever ago, dude, but he was, I don't know if you realize this, but he was Megatron's replacement. So he was the number one receiver that year in free agency this time. And we went out and signed him. So the way that contract is structured, unfortunately, it's not the most favorable. So I'm assuming that they're going to probably work out a deal to get him, because he's a good receiver, man.
He's a good receiver. I like Marvin Jones a lot. I think that both of those guys are coexisting just fine.
Yeah, I mean, if he could play the Vikings every week, my goodness. But 4 touchdowns aside, and back to Golladay. I mean, I think that they complement each other well. They just brought back Amendola. I feel like the 3 of them on the field together, that's a great trio of receivers, and Stafford can work well with that. And I feel like when they were all healthy and on the field at the same time, which, geez, it feels like that was only a couple games last season because Amendola was banged up before Stafford. But, the end result of half of a season of Matt Stafford and half of a season of our backup quarterbacks still resulted in Kenny Golladay making the Pro Bowl. And, that's kind of a nod to him because he worked his ass off and, he's got a level head on his shoulders. It's nice to, as a Detroit Lions fan, see a guy like Golladay who's young. He's 26 and he's going to be, going into this last season of his deal. And, he's already expressed that he's not worried about it at all. And he thinks, things are going to take care of themselves. And, as a fan, you love to hear a guy be super cooperative like that. But, he understands that, he's ascended into the upper echelon of receivers. And I just hope we can keep Stafford. We can't forget that, Golladay in 2018, Stafford was beat up at the end of that season as well. So this dude's been producing, no matter what. And it's good to see things like that. He housed that first pass from David Blau, and it doesn't matter who's throwing him the ball, man. He's going to be a monster for sure. I love me some Kenny Golladay.
Yeah, and I think that, you got to take the shot. You're going to pay up for this guy in Dynasty startups, but I think you can get it still even this season. You're going to have get him in a nice area where you can feel comfortable drafting Kenny Golladay. Someone you're going to get probably at even more of a discount in redraft and Dynasty is Cortland Sutton. And, this guy, he had more targets to Kenny Golladay. He had more receptions. And, he improved on his touchdown total by 2. So it went from 4 to 6. And I think he really ascended. He turned into the number one receiver that he really truly is. And I think, Cortland Sutton, when he was coming out and the Cowboys, I remember, the Cowboys had him in on a private workout and they were looking to maybe draft him with that first round pick. And they got Van Der Esch instead, right? You could have argued that they could have gotten Cortland Sutton there and had their number one receiver. It wouldn't have to be dealing with this Amari Cooper situation because now Denver has themselves a stud in Sutton. And they have Drew Lock, who came out and look, he played decent. He played pretty well and was moving the ball down the field, gave this Broncos offense a little bit of life, a little bit of swagger out there. We saw the videos of him rapping Young Jeezy. This guy he has a little bit of flavor, and you need that, at the quarterback position. And it's kind of more, we thought we had that in Baker Mayfield, and the opposite really happened this year with him being kind of a dud out there. But Drew Lock, that's kind of what we wanted to see in Baker, was him coming out, throwing the ball around, looking to his number one receiver. There was the one game where he had 2 touchdowns through to Cortland Sutton, and he gave him 10 targets in 2 games at the end of the season. So Lock, hopefully you see some, improvement. And he's going to be the guy going in, after an off season. Of course, we saw it with Baker Mayfield where he didn't succeed. I think this is a really good comparison with Baker. A guy that came in at the end of the year, had some juice, but, could that fizzle out? And we have some regression. It is up for debate, but I do think that with Cortland Sutton, the way that they have this Broncos offense, I think that the targets will still funnel to Sutton. So you're really getting a lot of safety there. What are your thoughts on Sutton and Locke in this whole Broncos offense?
It's crazy, the similarities with, Locke and Mayfield, isn't it? I mean,
I really didn't even think about that until I was talking about it, and I was like, wow, yeah, this actually does – these guys really do have a lot in common.
Well, the funny thing is, though, is it's like, coming off the rookie season and going into the second year, I mean, that's when we typically see these first and second round quarterbacks. That's when they take their biggest leap. And it's like, we really kind of got let down by Mayfield. So it's like, and that's kind of abnormal, So for me to think that, because I like Drew Lock. So, I mean, I think that's going to be kind of and I'm not going to bring, drag the Browns around in this, but I feel like a lot of that was, Freddie Kitchens play calling and
right.
And all that. I mean,
Definitely.
Just let Todd Monken call the plays, man. Jeez. But it's, I feel like a lot of that is not something that Drew Lock has to worry about. And it's funny because, we're talking about the similarities between these quarterbacks, but then also similarities between, Golladay and Sutton. They had dealing with different quarterbacks, halfway through the year. And,
right.
At the same time, it's weird because I did think Sutton was going to be a Cowboy, and I thought Michael Gallup would be a Bronco, and now they're on the opposite teams. And I feel like these guys are going to be compared, for probably quite a while. But it's funny. The thing I find funny with Sutton's value, and you might have noticed this, and maybe you feel the same way, but like 2018, Mandy Sanders goes down, and you're like, oh, okay, we want to see what Sutton can do now that he's going to be the guy. And sure, it was disappointing. I'll just say, it wasn't super disappointing, but it's a guy that, high draft pedigree. I mean, people probably expected a little more out of Sutton, I guess. But then it's like the opposite last year going in. Joe Flacco was just a total disaster.
Yikes.
And then they trade Sanders, who, by the way, I was dead wrong on. I did not expect him to come out guns blazing like he did last year. But they moved him out of Denver to San Fran. And a lot of the sentiment felt the same. Like, oh, it's going to be the same thing like last year. He's not going to be able to, to cut it. And, like he's not going to be able to handle the team's best corner or what have you. There was all this negative talk about Sutton, and I mean, dude just went out and balled. So
he delivered, that first game with Locke. I mean, 5 targets, 4 receptions, 74 yards, 2 touchdowns, just super efficient against Casey Hayward, the best corner in the game. I mean, time after time, the dude just proves you wrong. And maybe when I say you, I'm talking about myself, because every week in DFS, I would fade Cortland Sutton, and he would make me pay by literally flying into the end zone and catching a ball with one hand. I mean, there's literally a specific play where he jumps from like the 3-yard line into like halfway to the back of the end zone and catches the ball. So yeah, dude really did have a good season. It's funny, man, these two players, I picked them for a reason. Golladay and Cortland Sutton, similar season, 72 receptions for Sutton, 65 for Kenny Golladay, within 10 targets of each other, within 50 yards receiving. And what's the big outlier? It's the touchdowns. And it's 11 for Golladay. He's one of 3 players last year to go over 10 touchdowns. I'm blanking on the one guy. The other was Mark Andrews.
No, but you're right, though. I mean, you look at these similarities. But I will say this though: the one thing that, even though Golladay does have the edge in touchdowns, I felt like Sutton's consistency was the thing that a lot of people were just overlooking it. I mean, if you take a look, I believe his game before the Drew Lock game against the Bills. But I mean, come on, dude! Like, the Bills shut down everybody last year, and that was the only game where he had. He had 2 games where he had less than 4 catches, but. When you look at that, I mean, just 2 games where you didn't have at least 4 catches, that's pretty consistent, especially if you compare the game logs to Golladay. So I feel like that is something where, these guys, are both making a name for themselves, and both Sutton Pro Bowler as well. So, I mean, that's, and these guys are definitely on the up and up. And just for like a value comparison's sake, looking at the Fantasy Pros Dynasty rankings, Galladay's in there as a consensus number 12 and Sutton at number 15. And the only two guys between them, Keenan Allen and A.J. Brown. I personally have Sutton over Allen. But again, these guys are neck and neck in the ranks, just like we were talking about Singletary and Montgomery.
Man, hesitant to ask because I think I already know the answer, but you're on the clock. Who are you taking?
Dude, honestly.
Let's say redraft.
I mean, if it's redraft, I'm gonna count on Kenny Golladay giving me more, being in that same area of the touchdowns. Maybe he's not gonna get to double digits, but I think like 9 touchdowns, right, something like that is reasonable. With a full
like his floor is like 7 or 8.
Yeah, and that's the only thing. I think his touchdown floor is a little bit higher, and I feel like a full season of Matt Stafford is going to help, but I think it's going to help a little more than a full season of Drew Lock helps Sutton. You know what I mean?
And that's fair. And I agree completely with that. And you're right. Like this floor and the ceiling is higher as far as touchdowns go. Galladay's ceiling is just higher overall. You got to really think there. The one advantage of Sutton, he's the unequivocal guy. There's no Marvin Jones out there with Sutton. I mean, we saw Deshaun Hamilton really just not make the best of his opportunity there when Sanders got traded. I really thought that he would step up, but he did not. So Sutton is the clear guy. So I think that that's the only really advantage you can see there is that that you're getting that funnel target volume there. Let's talk about Hollywood Brown. And, I wrote here on the doc, forgotten man, and I think that's kind of what he is. Who is everyone talking about right now? It's A.J. Brown, right? It's Terry Debo and A.J. Brown are the two main ones, and Terry McLaurin, and for good reason. But all of these guys, specifically in Dynasty startups right now, where recency bias is, of course, a thing, everyone is going crazy over A.J. Brown. You mentioned it. What was Fantasy Pros have him at 13?
Yeah, I mean, A.J. Brown's right there with these guys.
I mean, that is, in my opinion, like I haven't ranked out anybody. He's probably going to fall in somewhere around there. That just sounds high, right? I mean, it just sounds high. I mean, A.J. Brown is a great player. He has an amazing potential right now. But it was one season of Ryan Tannehill. And, are we really that sold on this Ryan Tannehill, the Ryan Tannehill experience in Tennessee? I mean, we just have to really think about this here. Hollywood Brown coming out had the highest ceiling of any wide receiver coming out of the 2019 class. I mean, would you say that's safe to say?
Oh yeah. I mean, he was everybody's favorite.
Right.
I mean, I like all the draft guys.
I mean the
draft Twitter was in love with them.
Right. I mean, I guess you could argue before the draft, everybody was all over Hakeem Butler. Everybody was all over, DK, of course the combine guys were scolding him. And, I think that, his value dipped because of that from fantasy perspective. But, Marquise Brown, he is in a great situation right now. And we know that he's the guy in Baltimore with the MVP Lamar Jackson, who, yes, we should expect some regression. I mean, look what happened with Patrick Mahomes. He didn't pass for 50 touchdowns again. So you can see that similarity with Lamar Jackson. Yeah, we might see some regression, but what we're going to see from Marquise Brown, as long as the Ravens don't make any moves, is he's their number one receiver. He's going to be out there for most of the snaps. And yes, they are a run first team, but you're getting this, very young stud of a wide receiver at such a discount because of what I just mentioned. Deebo Samuel, A.J. Brown, Terry McLaurin, these guys are going to go ahead of Hollywood Brown. And lo and behold, the dude with the highest ceiling coming out of the 2019 class is just sitting there. Like I said, with this explosive player in Lamar Jackson, he's the number one receiver going into his second season, guys. I mean, we have to think about Hollywood Brown as being just right now, crazy value in Dynasty startups.
Oh, yeah. And then, you take a look at the guys that we're kind of pitting him up against. We already talked about A.J. Brown maybe being a little high between guys like Golladay and Sutton in the rankings. But right now, if we're looking at the consensus dynasty, I mean, I'll just read them right off. They have, 29, McLaurin, 30, Debo. And then there's Marquise Brown. He's literally right there. So all three of these guys neck and neck going into their sophomore season. And I feel that there's a ton of similarities between, where the Ravens are right now with their offense and where the Chiefs are, or I should say where they were a year ago. Now, of course, as me and I record this, the Chiefs aren't even yet a month removed from being Super Bowl champs. And it's different in the way that the Chiefs offense has this guy who's still, a great athlete, but has probably the most impressive arm I've ever seen. And they're trying to work in ways where they can use him. And it's like they're still discovering the things that they can do. And like, what have we unlocked, in this mystical being? And that's how the Ravens are right now. But it's not necessarily because of the arm, but it's because of the athletic potential from, Lamar. And it's just, he's, like you said, MVP. I mean, the dude led the league in touchdown passes. So you love having one of those main targets. Right. And you mentioned Mark Andrews getting all those touchdowns. That offense is very, very tight end centric when they get down in the red zone. But when you think about it, that's the perfect way to run this offense. You get down close. They don't know if it's just going to be, Ingram or Lamar. You got all these tight ends in there. And then you got Hurst and Andrews, who for as many touchdowns as, Andrews said. You mentioned the Lamar touchdown regression. I think a big chunk of that's coming off Andrews because, he's not even out there for, all the snaps. And,
sure.
In comparison to how they're using him, I feel like that just makes the upside of Hollywood Brown that much more appealing. And I think just like I mentioned, some of the consistency being kind of like a hidden source of value for Sutton. I feel like the inconsistency that we've seen from Brown, of course he popped off in that first game and, just kind of left people wanting more of that. And we never really saw that massive. I mean, he never even hit 100 yards in any game after that. So right. Some of the inconsistencies from Hollywood, I think, is the reason that his value is so low. But to see him kind of grouped right with those guys that we just talked about, McLaurin and Debo, it's not surprising, but there's a reason that he's still there with those guys that were a little more consistent, and I think it's because of the upside.
Yeah, 100%. All of these guys have a higher volume of targets. Each of the guys that we talked about right there, you can tell that's how it's going to be in the immediate future. This is a run-first team. At the end of the season, they don't need to throw the ball down the field. They are a methodical run-first offense, and Hollywood Brown is going to be game scripted out in games next season. It's going to happen. You're going to have games, and you have to try to see that with the schedule. You have to understand that, and you can't necessarily play him every week. He's not there right now. As we speak, and he may not be for a couple of years. It might take some time for him to be that guy, but we know 7 touchdowns last season. He had 2 touchdowns in 2 separate games. We know what kind of player he is. He is that boom type of player, and he should be used as such, and I think that's where he's placed right now. But I think in a few years, or if, let's say, Mark Ingram leaves, in 2 years, and we still have Hollywood Brown and Lamar Jackson, you could see a Ravens offense that looks a lot different where they are passing more in just, a couple of years. So getting him in now at, the back of the 7th round in a dynasty startup, it's a beautiful thing when you look at Hollywood Brown and, the career that he could potentially have as one of the, premier deep threats in the league. That's what he's going towards. That's what he's he already is there, really, right? I mean, if we're talking about from a talent perspective, he's really there as one of the premier threats. We just haven't seen him flourish just yet. Similar to Tyreek Hill coming out of his first year. We knew the potential of Tyreek Hill, and then it came together, and he was used more. They found more ways to use him. It could be the case with Hollywood Brown right away, really.
Yeah, and one thing that I think a lot of people, when they're kind of digging into last year's numbers, because let's face it, I mean, from NFL, that's all we have to look at is 2019 when we're talking about McLaurin, we're talking about A.J. Brown, and we're talking about Marquise Brown, and Debo, and all these guys. And I mean, you want to take a look at what these guys have done. And that's what you kind of think of. You think of Hollywood Brown being a premier deep threat. That's obviously going to be something that's a trick he has up his sleeve. It could be his calling card, but just for example, I mean, McLaurin's at a 62.5% catch rate, and then we have A.J. Brown not quite at 62, and there's Hollywood Brown at almost 65%. So not only is he, more of a deep threat, but I mean, he's catching more of his passes than these guys are in comparison. And I mean, the touchdowns are there too. He scored 7 touchdowns on 46 catches. And, you want to look at some of the other guys, like their yards per target. Like, okay, so, consistently, whatever rookie receiver kind of like leads their class in yards per target, that's kind of like, this guy's like destined for greatness. Well, right now that's A.J. Brown. But let's not forget that A.J. Brown had 2 plays last year where he pretty much caught like a slant and just housed it.
Right.
And that was – a lot of that was poor tackling on one of those, man. It was just atrocious. And the other one was just, it was a great play. So that's why his yards per target is spiked up so high. You have to kind of take those 2 massive plays into account. Otherwise, I mean, Hollywood is right there with those guys, as far as like his efficiency. And I thought he was pretty impressive for only having like 71 targets. I mean, dude, that's as many passes as Sutton caught.
Right.
So I do think he is a good value.
We're going to do a little switch up here, Josh. You ready?
Okay. Oh, I'm ready.
Yeah, we're switching it up. I have here on the dock where we're going to talk about a dynasty stash, but you brought up an intriguing topic before we got into this, and it was the Giants wide receiver situation going into 2020. So let's save the stashes for next week. When we get into our free agent episode, we'll start off with the stash. But this week, I want to talk a little Giants offense. And I have a little bit of a bias here. I drafted Daniel Jones as my number 1 quarterback in the Superflex. So this is what happened. The quarterback run started, and I was on the tail end of that thing, and I had all that was left. I was hoping Jameis Winston, your boy Josh, would fall to me. I was okay with that, as him as my number 1. Of course, he got snatched up right before me, so I hear you. You wanted those 5,000 yards, right? I wanted 5,000 yards. Yeah, I wanted Mike Evans. I wanted Chris Godwin. Yeah, I'm okay with that. But no, there was quarterbacks available. I guess Brady and whatever starter I could think of right now, Kobe Brissett, guys like that were available. But Daniel Jones just gives me a high ceiling going into his second season, and I think that this Giants offense can be a little bit better than people might think. So that means that there's value to be had at the wide receiver position. Josh, how are you looking at this situation? I mean, I guess I'll put you on the spot here because it's your topic, and I guess you've thought about it a little bit. What is your perception of this wide receiver situation?
Yeah, just kind of, was briefly thinking about this today, and like I said, I haven't thought too hard on it, but I thought it was interesting because, I mean, especially if we're kind of, looking at some of these things, like you mentioned, from a dynasty perspective with Jones, from a dynasty perspective on 2 of my teams, I had Darius Slayton last year. And I mean, that's a guy that I got for free, completely free off the wire. And in one league, I kept him because I'm really interested to see how this scenario plays out. And in the other one, I sold him, and that was in our Next Fan Up Dynasty League. It was worth it. I sold out. Flags fly forever, and I'm flying my championship flag right now. So it did pay off. But in that, and I guess that's what Dynasty is all about, is the value and how relative it is. So for somebody like me, if you on the other team where I still have Slayton, that's a guy that I would easily throw into a deal if I was trying to upgrade and, like at another position, for example. I feel like Devontae Freeman might be toast. So I'm trying to offer him and Slayton in that same league for, an upgrade at the running back position and dangling a pick. But it's all relative to where the value is. In another league, I own Sterling Shepard, and I just feel like, dude, I'm never going to get my value from him because he's always injured. And why I continue to sit on him, I don't know, but I guess it's just because we've seen 2 seasons now where he's had, over 100 targets. But it's tough because, like you mentioned with Jones, this time last year, I really didn't even know what to think because we didn't know if the Giants were going to go and get a quarterback, and the ability for Eli Manning to support, 1, let alone 2 fantasy relevant receivers was kind of questionable. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but I just really felt like this time last year, we didn't know what you could expect from any Giants receiver, to be totally honest. And then you have a guy like Golden Tate going there, and I mean, down season for him, but it's, 85 catches or 85 targets, I should say, nothing to be upset about, especially when the guy gets in the box 6 times. So it's tough, man, because I don't know how these 3 guys are kind of gonna play out. I mean, it's part of me feels like Tate.
You have targets to go around to Barkley, and you have targets to go around to Evan Engram. So, how much targets are there really for all of these wide receivers?
Right. And, mentioning this wide receiver room, I mean, I guess that's kind of where I was I was drawing that out maybe a little long, but that's kind of the point I was getting to is like, none of these guys are the number 1 target. It's Engram. And right. I mean, it's definitely going to be something to behold though. If we could ever get Sterling Shepard, Evan Engram, and Saquon Barkley all to just be healthy at the same time, because I do feel like a guy like Golden Tate is a good complementary receiver. He's definitely not a number 1. Percy Harvin made him well aware of that back in the day. And, if you ever heard about the trash can story. But Darius Slayton, I feel like Slayton is the most interesting dynasty piece right now. But I feel like he's a sell. Just because you got him for free wherever you're at, pretty much.
Yeah, he's a good sell. I agree with that. I think that there's multiple avenues for Darius Slayton right now. I mean, Golden Tate obviously isn't going to be there for a prolonged period of time. So once he's out the door, you'll see more volume for Darius Slayton theoretically. But he's a sell because a lot of his damage was done Slayton's last year with Engram hurt, with Sterling Shepard hurt. So you have all these guys healthy, including Saquon Barkley, who was out, missed time, was banged up even when he played. So you have to factor that in, because I think that you might be thinking, and this is just, how I'm thinking about right now, you might be thinking that Darius Slayton is a very sneaky, you're going to get him at value, and of course you are, but you might be expecting, an ascension of what we saw from last year, and that might not come to fruition because of the volume. But the way I look at it, I mean, when I look at the receiver tree, Darius Slayton on the outside, Golden Tate and Sterling Shepard, both of those guys can play slot. But Sterling Shepard, I guess, would be on the outside if we're looking at a 3-receiver set. Slayton is the prototypical wide receiver 1. As far as his body and how he can get jump balls and who Daniel Jones feels comfortable throwing those 50-50 balls to, we saw last year it's Darius Slayton. So there is that, there. I think that's where he's at right now, but how many targets can he really get?
Yeah, and I mean, you saw he got the same amount of targets basically as Tate did, but like you said, I mean, it's just there were games last year where, like, if you were looking for Giants value receivers, the dudes that were playing, like, a couple of them didn't even have pictures on DraftKings, and it's just like, who are these guys? There was like a game where Slayton had 15 targets, but I agree, man. Like, so if we're talking dynasty startup, I actually like Slayton quite a bit. So, and for some of the reasons that you pointed out, I mean, we could see Golden Tate get moved by the trade deadline if the Giants aren't competitive, which, honestly, I think they're a year or two away from that.
Right.
They could prove me wrong. They did go to Jones a lot earlier last year than I thought they would. I really thought we'd get to, 8-10 games of Eli Manning, and then you'd see the Daniel Jones. But no, they did. They went to him very early, which I thought was good. From a growth standpoint, obviously, I think in today's NFL, you have to kind of put those QBs out there right away because, how else are they going to learn? But I feel like they'd be fine getting rid of Golden Tate because they still do have, Cody Latimer, not like he's, a stud or anything, but, he does provide a little depth for that team. And, I wouldn't be surprised at all if they, added another receiver in the draft. But yeah, man, Slayton can go up and get in the ball, so he's definitely intriguing. But I'll just be totally honest. Like if we're talking dynasty startup, I'm a little lower than the field on Shepard.
We've seen high volume games from Shepard. We've seen, good games from him where he, really can take command of, the target share in a given, quarter or two. And then he ends up with a nice day on the box score. But it's just we haven't really seen that longevity. And it's a big part of that is health. So, maybe we could get a full season of him and really confuse us in the terms of dynasty and what we make of Sterling Shepard there. But, Darius Slayton's on the up and up in this Giants offense. I think that's the guy I think we're talking about here. Of course, I think that Shepard, you're going to get great value for him wherever you are in drafts, in redraft, or dynasty startups. I think with this Giants offense, what you really want to do is you want to go for Evan Engram because that's the number one. That's the look for the Giants offense. And everybody else is going to split targets. I mean, 3 ways. So that's really how you have to look at it. Barring injury, though, one of these guys can really step up and have a successful 2020 campaign. I think, if Slayton were to miss time and then all of a sudden Sterling Shepard is there with Golden Tate, all of a sudden Shepard's, value rises. But what's the more likely scenario? It's Shepard getting injured and Slayton being the guy who steps into that role of a higher volume. And they already have the chemistry there with Daniel Jones. We've already seen that. So I think that he's certainly the guy that you want to look for.
Going into his second season, just turned 23. So it's, in Dynasty, this guy you can hang on to for a long time. There's a lot of room for him to grow into his abilities, like what I saw last year. And I just hope it's not a scenario like you mentioned where, someone does have to get injured for us to see a lot of Slayton. But, it'd be nice to see him just get worked in regularly. But, yeah, it's going to be tough, man. There's a lot of mouths to feed with Barkley and Engram. And, those are 2 of their top priorities.
Josh, this has been fun, man. The first episode of The Hot Take is in the books. How are we feeling?
Oh, man, I can't believe it went by this fast already. We could do this every week. Actually, that's probably a good idea. We should.
Hey, you know what? Now that you mention it, let's do it. We're going to do it every week, and I'm excited to gear up towards the NFL draft. We're going to cover the free agent market next week. Of course, I teased that Dynasty stash. We'll open up with the Dynasty stash, a running back that hasn't quite broken out yet, and we're going to cover the fantasy free agents. Josh, you do work over at Fantasy Pros. Please follow Josh on Twitter. Josh, where can they find your Twitter?
Yeah, you can find me at Josh Dalley 72. It's Dalley, and probably honestly going to be taking the year off from producing content just because it's from assignments. You kind of you dig up little facts and gems, but taking the year off is really going to allow me to kind of dig into the guys I want to, explore further. And I can get pretty deep down the rabbit hole. So it's when I kind of get onto something, I want to have the liberty to go and do it. So probably going to free up a little more time, but that just means I have more time to record more shows with you, my guy.
Most definitely. And we're going to have a blast this year at the Full-Time Fantasy Podcast Network. Follow Full-Time Fantasy at Full-Time Fantasy. You can find the hot take on that website. You can subscribe over on iTunes, of course. We're at iHeartRadio, Spotify, wherever you listen to podcasts. On behalf of Josh Dalley, my name is Steve Toroni. This has been the Hot Take Podcast.
Thanks for listening to the Hot Take Podcast. Subscribe on Apple Music, Spotify, and wherever you listen to podcasts. Follow the guys on Twitter at FFProfessorST3 and at Josh Dalley 72.